Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hope you're having an amazing day. Here we go again, RDNA 4 rumours, despite the fact that the RX 7000 series has not even been on store shelves for more than it seems 5 minutes. Yep, the RX 7000 series is in its infancy, but I've already been hearing a ton of very intriguing pieces of information for its successor RDNA 4, along with RTX 50 and Intel 2. Let's just say that while we're enjoying very impressive performance with the current generation of graphics, well, we haven't seen anything yet, and it's very interesting actually. What I've heard is AMD's direction going forward for RDNA 4. I think it makes a lot of the decisions they've made for RDNA 3 make a lot more sense. And we're going to be discussing all of this in just a moment. But I'm sure many of you are asking, well, why is it we're already hearing RDNA 4 rumors? I mean, it's not even been 5 seconds since the RX 7000 series emerged, and honestly, I think it just comes down to the fact that AMD have leapfrogging design teams. This is something, of course, that they've used for Zen and many other architectures going, back over several years now. And it's also quite close to what happened with RDNA 1 and RDNA 2. Before RDNA 1 even launched, I was actually breaking the fact that RDNA 2 supported hardware-based ray tracing and had several other major updates and changes. So yeah, I think that was somewhere in like early 2019 I was actually revealing that information. So it's just kind of how AMD's info seems to leak. Now, of course, these GPUs are not going to launch anytime soon, but it's still very fascinating to see what direction this stuff is going to go. And we're going to get right into it after this message from the video's sponsor.
If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices.
So before we get into the details of the cards, let's get some housekeeping out of the way, shall we? First of all, these are obviously very early rumours, and while I will touch on things like performance targets, specifications, and also architectural details in this video, obviously this is not final. These are products which are not taped out and ready to ship. So things can change up until pretty much the last minute. An example of this as well is how rumours have evolved. RDNA 3's initial specifications pointed out to dual GCD configurations. There were so many sources telling us this that when I first went public and stated that I actually think this consensus was wrong and it was just a single GCD for RDNA 3, I actually was very nervous. I thought I was going out on quite a fragile limb. But obviously this did turn out to be correct. Basically, the whispers and bits of information I have for RDNA 4 I am pretty confident in, but I don't also want to go into some specifics I was told because it's either only been single source or just doesn't sound quite right. I want you therefore to consider the stuff as entertainment. Whispers and very early details, but certainly not a complete leak of what AMD's roadmap is going forward. And the second point, and this I think is also as critical, is RDNA 3's clock frequencies have caused a lot of controversy, with many leaks from myself and others stating that the parts were capable of hitting over 3 GHz. Obviously, when this was announced, when the parts were announced, this just was not achieved. But again, the leaks I was told and others was 3.2 to 3.5 GHz was achievable, but obviously the final silicon didn't hit this. I've already released a video on a possible refresh. I don't want to spend too long regurgitating that information because this video is already going to be kind of long by itself. But in a nutshell, we're looking at pretty much the same parts as we already have, albeit running at higher clock frequencies, and possibly a V-cache variant on the highest end SKUs. This will basically double the amount of infinity cache on the chip. Curiously though, folks are already starting to play around with overclocking with N31. Ryan, Titanic Freak, over at Chips and Cheese, was posting some results on Twitter. In Blender, he managed to hit 3.5 GHz overclocking. Now, of course, workloads in Blender differ to, say, a game. So this leaves us with a lot of tantalizing questions. Either the early rumours of clocks were plain wrong, for example, maybe it was only achievable on specific targets, but I'd been told games multiple times. Given the strange clock behaviour of RDNA 3, and again, given sources told me 3.5 GHz was achievable in games, and they were right on pretty much every other aspect of the chip, I don't know whether this is the case or whether the issue is something else. Either way, it doesn't stop the 7900 series of cards from AMD being pretty fantastic, and a great prelude of what's to come for RDNA 4. So let's get the basics of RDNA 4 out of the way. It is a completely new graphics architecture. We're looking at some significant changes across the board, not just in terms of the architecture and features itself, but of course the way the specifications of the chip is actually handled. Now there is technically a GCD and MCD system in place, but there are significant changes into our understanding of what a GCD actually is. I promise I will get into specifics very soon, but I really want you guys to get the basic understanding locked in before we get too deep, because otherwise you won't really understand what I mean. Basically, while there is technically only a single GCD for RDNA, in fact, I've stated multiple times in the past that RDNA 4 was only a single GCD, so I'm kind of right. It's actually further segmented into GCXs. Well, not always multiple GCXs, as we'll get into in a moment. Now, I understand that GCX stands for Graphics Compute Die, and it basically appears multiple chiplets which can be tied together using an intricate mesh of wires and silicon to form a larger whole. To my understanding, you could basically associate these in your mind as, say, a compute die like Intel's Meteor Lake with some changes. Now, I've also heard the terms shader engine die and shader engine complex, but I've not specifically been told how these differ and interconnect right now. So I don't want to start filling the rumor mill with more speculation, because I think it's just going to become part of, how people understand RDNA 4, and I don't think that's fair to you guys. So I'm letting you know the terminology, but I don't specifically know what it does. I could speculate, I have some guesses, but again, I don't want to state what it is in the video for those reasons that I've just mentioned. So let's get into some basics of RDNA 4. ALU count for RDNA 4's CU is identical to RDNA 3, that's 128/64 ALU depending on FP. MCD chiplets still act as both cache and memory controllers. GDDR7 is most likely used. 50 to 60% performance per watt gain, I'm less confident in that. Higher clock frequencies, 3.5 GHz seems easily achievable, assuming they hit the target, see N31. Over double the performance of their predecessor. For example, N41 is 2 times N31. GCX, Graphics Compute Die. There are 48 compute units per GCX. Now note, this number is still very early. It could either increase or decrease based on yields, cost and more, but so far it is planned to be 48. There are 3 shader engines per GCX. So obviously, if you have 2 GCXs, that's 6 shader engines, a single GCX, 3 shader engines, and so on. PCIe 5 seems most likely, as 6 will most likely not be ready in time. TSMC 3 and 4nm for the GCDs seems to be in place. Basically, it's going to depend on the target. I'm less confident in that, but we'll wait and see. There are significantly beefed up AI and ML capabilities. We'll get into why in just a second. There are major ray tracing gains. I've seen multiple sources tell me they are, quote, significant, but I have no details as to how this has been achieved. But given what I've heard about RTX 50, I think it's probably going to be very much required, and we'll get to that later on. Caches such as L0 see big upgrades. This is a big change, an obvious one, but unfortunately, again, I have nothing specific yet. There is a 3rd generation of Infinity Cache. Again, I've been told there's a really big update to how this works, but unfortunately, again, I don't have anything specific. There is new data prefetching, improved software dependency manager, WMMA or Wave Matrix Multiply Accumulate, well, that's a pain in the ass to say. V2 allows significant improvements in performance, so it's 2 times per CU for those instructions. This basically means full SIMD lane usage. lots of big and small changes across the architecture, particularly to accommodate the GCD/GCX changes. Because of the improvements to WMMA as well as other tweaks, I've heard that there will be more variants of both prosumer and server markets, potentially with more Infinity Cache modules, or should I say MCDs. So let's get into the actual very early information of 41, 42 and 43. Again, this is super early stuff, and just a small change could of course affect the entire performance across the stack. Currently, if we see the 48 compute units per GCX remain true, there are 144 compute units in N41, because there are 3 GCXs total. So the complicated maths that we need to go through here, you may need a calculator. I would suggest maybe even an abacus. We need to go to 48 times 3. If you have a really great understanding of maths, you can probably figure out the number. It's 143. Yeah, I'm pretty tired when I'm writing this, can you tell? We have 18,432/9,216 ALU, depending on how you wish to count them. I'm going to give both figures like RDNA 3. Who knows, there may be some change I don't know about, which changes this number anyway. But again, I was told the numbers are basically identical to RDNA 3. However, because the number of compute units could still change per GCX, this number could change. I was told there are 2 times performance expected for over N31. Now, you may notice that the actual ALU count is only 50% higher, but I've been told it's because of a combination of higher clock frequencies, architecture improvements, ALU, and more. I don't know which N31 variant they're comparing it against. Is it the currently released variant, or is it the refresh? I'm going to assume it's the currently released variant, although honestly I don't exactly expect N31 refresh, let's call it a 7950 XTX. It's not like it's going to be 50% faster than the current generation. Let's just be honest, guys. So the MCD and memory configuration, I've actually heard 2 different sets of specifications. Specification 1 was 32 gigabytes of GDDR7 with 4 MCDs. The second configuration is 24 or 48 gigabytes. The latter I'm assuming is going to be a prosumer card, GDDR7 and 6 MCDs. So far, sources seem to be more confident in configuration 2, with 24 gigabytes of memory being more likely for gaming variants. I'm assuming also that if there are 4 MCDs, it would also mean that the card itself, the MCDs themselves would need to have some changes. For example, they would need to be larger in capacity. N42, 96 compute units, so we're looking at basically the same GCX. The only difference is rather than them being each GCD containing 3 CCXs, for N42 it's only 2. So the ALU count goes down as you would expect. So 12,288 or 6144. So it's basically the same shader count as we have with N31. Again, this number could change. I've heard the target is at least 2 times its predecessor, N32. I've only heard a single configuration here for the memory though, 4 MCD with GDDR7. The fact I've only heard 4 MCD with N32 does slightly increase the chance that the 6 MCD configuration for N41 is correct. Now this is where things get a little funky. N43, this is the lowest end part as you probably can imagine, 48 compute units. So this is a single GCX. Now I have to say, I was kind of surprised about this because I was also told that there is 2 MCDs with GDDR7. Now I'm actually really surprised about this because I expected them to utilize a monolithic die for this, but allegedly no, it's going to still be chiplet. I'm going to be very interested if this is true, or if we're starting to just simply get a little bit of confusion. Like for example, maybe there is only 48 compute units and sources have gotten confused and that's what was stated. I can't confirm this. I'm only going to report what I was told, which is it's a single GCX with 2 MCDs. That's what I was told. But now let's move over to Nvidia, because I've already been told a couple of very intriguing things concerning RTX 50 Blackwell and Nvidia in general. The highest end SKUs are almost certainly going to be chiplet. I've discussed this previously ad nauseum. This is going to really depend whether they feel they need it to compete with AMD, but Nvidia are very determined to keep the lead over AMD. One source actually told me that if RDNA 3 had been faster, and AMD would have come out on top. We may have even seen Nvidia release a GH202 variant. This would be for gaming. It's kind of an emergency break glass scenario. Basically, Jensen does not like to lose, and I think honestly they would do anything, because even if it wasn't viable financially, even if that sucker cost like, you know, $2.5 grand, but it just appeared on the top of the, you know, the benchmark graphs, I think that would be all they cared about, and they would have, of course, very limited quantity of this thing. It would be super hard to get hold of. They would have very limited quantities. It would cost more than, you know, your kidney would, but they would still have it available as a product. That's basically how it was told to me anyway. Currently, there are a number of Blackwell evaluation SKUs. Now, I want to be very clear here. We're not talking about fully taped out designs, which actually have physical presence, and, you know, they're basically, you know, kind of running games like Control on them, you know, absolutely perfectly. We're talking about very early designs, which are being validated internally. Blackwell does leverage, though, an entirely new SM structure. I've heard a couple of details. Firstly, a hyperspeed bus interlinks various SMs/chiplets. There is also a denoising accelerator, part of the RT pipeline. I've no details about this. Sounds kind of strange given that's what tensor cores do, but allegedly this is specific. I'm not super confident in this, but this is what I was told. And it's of course going to be very important for RT and path tracing. The thing that really raised my eyebrow is when Source told me this, they're touting it as the biggest performance leap in Nvidia history, and that's quite a bold statement, because when you think about it, that means it's even bigger than, let's say, GTX 980 to 1080, or even some of the earlier leaps, like, you know, the first, what is it, TNT 1 to TNT 2, or even GeForce 1 to GeForce 2, like, just, even the GTX, you know, the 8800 GTXs and Ultras, they were just so powerful. So I don't know, that's a really bold statement. I'm going to be very interested to see whether that's achievable and how they are actually characterizing this performance, because again, it could be multiple ways. Are we talking like tensor core performance? Are we talking, you know, everything coming together? So it's ray tracing performance, you know, AI performance, everything. Are we talking about game frame rates? So for example, you get 100 frames a second in with an RTX 4090, and with a 5090 or whatever it ends up being called, you get 250 frames a second. I don't know. I also want to throw in ARC, and I'm going to keep this pretty brief, but I've already a fair smattering of info regarding Intel's plans. I'll dive deeper into this in a separate video. Intel themselves have officially confirmed Alchemist, which is currently out now. It's Gen 1. I've actually got an Alchemist graphics card. I got there in the end, but I haven't tested it yet because I've been moving. Intel sent it to me for review, so I will get around to it. But they've also announced Battle Mage, Celestial, and finally Druid. So Druid, of course, being Gen 4, Battle Mage being Gen 2, and Celestial Gen 3. Intel's Battle Mage is currently in development, of course, and targeting a 2023 release. Raja Koduri has already stated that they are still on track with their roadmap, and they have no plans to cancel. Curiously, he's already hinted the performance of the card, because he stated that they feel that the sweet spot for gamers is 225 watts. Now, the interesting thing is, that's actually what I got told, that the performance targets are roughly a mid-range card. Basically, RTX 4070. Now, this is assuming they hit their targets. I mean, I'd actually heard multiple times that the Intel, you know, Gen 1 cards were supposed to be significantly more powerful, but stuff happened. To be fair to Intel, their drivers are becoming much better. So we'll see how that goes, because from my understanding, their strategy remains pretty steady. Improve their driver and software stack and appeal to as largest target market as possible. Low to mid-range buyers. I'm not really saying too much here that's new, but Intel Celestial, though, is where things become more interesting. I'm trying to get some details ironed out before I release too much info on this, but basically, I was told that this is where Intel really want to try to take flagship competition. It's likely chiplet based, and allegedly it's going to be very fast. Now, whether it's going to be able to keep up with the flagship Nvidia parts or not, I don't necessarily know if it matters. I do think it just matters if Intel can do so at a decent price. Now, I have to say that the actual intended video for today was not this. I was actually working on a PlayStation 5 Pro and an upgraded Xbox video, and I'd actually almost finished the script when I was given a bunch of RDNA 4 and, well, all of this other info, and it's actually needed... Well, it's basically caused me to need to rewrite parts of that script for obvious reasons. Now, I don't think the PS5 Pro, for example, is going to be full RDNA 4, although obviously I may be surprised, but it does give us a glimpse of what AMD's strategy is going to be going forward. It's going to be very interesting, honestly, to see what the next generation of PC hardware is capable of. We've already seen some hints with Nvidia's direction going forward, for example, the remastering of titles such as Portal and Quake and so on using path tracing. Now, I don't want to say too much on this subject in terms of what I was told, because a lot of it was off the record, but it's not too difficult to realize that this is Nvidia's plan going forward. They are trying to figure out internally what it would take to basically get path tracing in AAA titles, current generation titles, going forward, and obviously at the moment we're still not there. Even with technologies such as DLSS and so on, it's going to take us a while going forward. But the amount of graphical horsepower in the next couple of generations of GPUs, I think, is going to be pretty staggering. And it's going to be very fascinating to see not only how consoles keep up, but also what developers do actually to really maximize this hardware. It's going to be a fascinating couple of years, I think, in technology, and I'm sure that the approaches for AMD, Nvidia, Intel, and of course the console manufacturers are all going to differ somewhat. And given the fact that game engines now, like Unreal Engine 5, are starting to become, well, just more common in terms of their adoption with developers. Obviously, it's not like we've got hundreds of games at the moment which is using UE5 which are released, but naturally over the next couple of years, this is going to start to really emerge. And it's going to be very fascinating too to see what all of this additional grunt can do, not just in terms of, like, I don't know, shiny looking pixels, but realism in games, better looking physics, and so on. It's going to be a fascinating couple of generations, I think, in terms of CPU, GPU performance. Before I close out the video, just a little bit of housekeeping outside of the housekeeping that I performed at the beginning. Obviously, as you probably can guess, yeah, still haven't organized the background at the moment. I've actually been doing a lot of, like, going to, you know, hardware stores and figuring out what the desk situation is going to be, but realistically it's probably going to be something that we organize after Christmas. I've had a ton of viewers that have given me some suggestions in kind of a desk strategies and stuff, and some of them have ranged from, you know, kind of IKEA-like furniture and like how you can kind of customize it to more custom solutions. And yeah, I think I've got a couple of ideas, but what I'm going to do is basically rip everything out, kind of lay stuff out, and, you know, go from there. So it's going to be very interesting, to be honest with you, to see what the final layout of this place is going to look like. There's going to be a lot of upgrades and tweaks I need to do, but obviously with Christmas coming up and, you know, seeing friends and family and stuff, it's just not something I really want to delve into right now. I want to try to produce as much content, get as much work done as possible for the holiday season. And yeah, that's just about it, I think, for this video. Hopefully, well, you've enjoyed it. I'm going to let you all go. Have an amazing day. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Bye for now.